Hi, thank you for joining us here at Tax Talk UK, where we talk about all things tax and consider other important aspects of working for yourself, running a small business, being self-employed. So today I'm going to talk about what you could look at if one of your customers hasn't paid you. Before I do that, if you're new here, please do take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll easily be able to refer back to this information if you need to, as well as being able to access other information that we have in a whole host of different topics, all aimed at supporting you in your self-employment. If you navigate to the playlist section of our YouTube channel, you will find the answers to the questions loosely catalogued into your individual circumstances. So if you look for the playlist that most closely describes you, then you should find the topics that will be more helpful to you. So back then to what if your customer or your client hasn't paid you, what should you do? So the first thing to say, of course, is not to take that personally. It can be very difficult depending on what industry you are in and what sort of relationship that you have with your customer and your client. It can be very upsetting, of course, if somebody hasn't paid you. So the first thing to do is to sort of to take the emotion out of it and to look at the situation logically and from a business perspective. So the first thing to consider is that how did you let your customer know that the money was outstanding? Did you send them an invoice by email or by post? Is there any possibility that they haven't received that? Do you know for definite that they have received that? So if we sort of take a step back and think how you are sending your invoices, is it a widespread problem? If it is, if you're having a lot of people not paying you, then you probably need to look in more detail about why this is. If it's generally your customers or clients are paying you on time and in full, then obviously that's what we're talking about today. So the first thing to do is to check that they know that the money's outstanding, and of course, as we talk in other videos, by sending regular statements to your customers or clients, this can help them as well as you to keep track on what is outstanding. So the first thing to do is to check with your customer or your client if they have received the invoice, and secondly, do they have any queries on it? So a sort of a basic sort of prompt to have you received the invoices, that do you have any queries on it? I noticed that it's overdue, and I was expecting to have received the payment. Now, sometimes people can find it hard to have that conversation. It's natural that you may feel a little bit awkward, especially when you're new to working for yourself. It's a whole new thing to be actually, you feel like you're sort of asking for money. But the thing to remember is that you have done the work or have supplied the product that you've invoiced for. So there's no reason why you shouldn't expect to be paid for it. The second thing to remember is that you may be organised, but the person who you're waiting to pay you may not be. So it may just be that that person is disorganised and the invoice has got is sort of lost in their emails or lost in a pile of paper somewhere. So again, sort of please don't take it personally that you haven't been paid. So if the statement hasn't prompted that payment, then sort of a gentle reminder, something sort of personal. Again, depending on how many customers that you have, how many how many you have to be chasing will sort of dictate the best way for that. So it's just, you know, these are just things to thinking on. It's not a process that this is what is the best thing to do. It's just the sort of like the way to be, you know, sort of more of a broad way to be sort of thinking, and possibilities to explore, and you know, sort of before you actually get to the point of, well, at this point it may be that the customer's just lost the invoice, or the email didn't arrive, and they've forgotten all about it. So if the statement hasn't prompted that, a gentle reminder may, you know, sort of, but may be sufficient to have the full payment forthcoming. Then it's important. So you may think, well, of course, there's nothing wrong with that invoice. There can't be anything they could query. Have done the work, have supplied the product. But of course, it doesn't hurt to ask, because this shows that you do care, that you've that your product is okay, or this, you know, the sort of service is there's no sort of queries from them. So again, you're not sort of saying, oh, I think there might be a problem. You're just, you know, you're asking, you know, do you have any queries on the invoice? Because actually, perhaps that they do have a query, and that is why they had left the invoice, that let it get to the bottom of their pile, because they hadn't had chance to sort of raise that with you. So that just actually gives them the opportunity, because ultimately, if there is a reason why they haven't paid it, then you need to know that. You can't resolve it by not knowing that. So you need to encourage your customer or your client to let you know if there are any queries. And then, of course, if there are, you need to sort of resolve those queries with your customer or your client, either to answer the questions in order that they will then be comfortable to pay the invoice fully, or perhaps they may have a query that means that you know, you want to discount that invoice or offer them a partial credit. I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm just saying, you know, that there may be circumstances that's you decide is the right course of action. So so firstly, we've checked that your customers received the invoice, and then we've checked that there's any queries. If there are queries, we've addressed those. If we feel it's appropriate to discount the invoice in any way, we do that. And then if the invoice still isn't forthcoming, or the customer or the client isn't engaging with you, then this is the time. As I say, you've done the work, you supplied the product, or you've supplied the service, and your customer or client hasn't told you that there's any queries, and they're not telling you that they've got any, you know, sort of like problems paying. Of course, if they come back and they say, you know, we've got this cash flow problem and whatever, then again, you can engage with them. And even if it may be frustrating for you to not be able to have the payment in full, but again, you may feel it's appropriate to enter into some payment plan. So if they do have cash flow problems, again, depending on the amount of the invoice and the amount that they owe to you, you may feel it appropriate to say, well, okay, I appreciate that, and would like to work with you. So, you know, why don't you pay me X amount to you know, to split that that payment. Ultimately, what you have to remember is you want to get paid for your invoice in the most efficient way. So you don't want to be sort of damaging that relationship. And even if you decide, actually, I don't want to carry out any work for that person in the future, it's still good practice to keep everything professional and to explore the different, you know, sort of the different reasons that the invoice may not have been paid. And again, I'm not saying that you must enter into some sort of payment plan with them. I'm just, again, giving you sort of things to think about. You may think that's not appropriate, or that specific person would take advantage of that. You may sort of think, you know, actually the value that they owe you is not sufficient for that. So again, it's just things to consider. So we've checked that they've received the invoice, we've checked if they've got any queries, we've addressed any queries, and we've checked you know, if they've raised any problems their end with cash flow, we've perhaps presented the opportunity to come to some sort of arrangement with them to help them, but ultimately to get paid. And still you're not paid. Perhaps perhaps they did have a query and you felt it was unreasonable and you couldn't enter, you know, sort of that you didn't get any sort of movement. Of course, if a customer is telling you that they're not happy with your invoice, then you know, ask them, well, you know, surely there's some value to what's been provided, so it's not acceptable to not pay any of it just because you're not happy. And again, what we're kind of working up to is, as we talk about a lot in lots of different aspects of working for yourself, is thinking of ultimately what we're going to be aiming to achieve. So as I mentioned at the start, we're aiming to achieve full payment of our invoice in a timely manner and in receiving that in a professional manner. So ultimately, we have to think, okay, if none of those things work and you are owed the money, then you have to sort of look at the, you know, sort of taking recovery action. Now, of course, there's plenty of businesses out there that would, for a percentage of the debt, help you with that. There's nothing wrong with that if you feel that that's appropriate. Make sure, as I always say with everything, if you are engaging someone to help you with something, make sure that they're qualified and licensed for what they are helping you with, that they are a member of the professional body if appropriate, and that they hold insurance. So that may be one avenue you decide. Depending on the amount, if we're talking about amounts that fall within the small claims threshold, you could actually go down the small claims court route yourself if you so wished. That would then enable you to charge interest, and there would be a cost that you would have to pay to lodge that with the court, and you would be able to add that on to what they owed you as well as interest. So ultimately, whether you do that or whether you engage somebody to do it for you, if you go down the legal route, ultimately you're going to end up potentially, unless they decide at some time through the process to pay, you're ultimately going to end up in front of a judge having to explain your position. So it's really important, and this is why, as well as it actually being good practice and professional, to explore with your customer, have they received the invoice, have they got any queries, explore payment plans if appropriate. What you need to think is, if ultimately you end up having a judge having to decide whether they should be paying you, then the judge will think it unreasonable if your customer says, but I didn't receive the invoice, didn't know anything about it until this point, then of course that's not going to be, it's going to just be a waste of everyone's time, and it would be unlikely that you would certainly get any of your costs back in terms of the cost of lodging the claim. Again, if your customer offered to pay you in a timely manner, it may be because of the length of the process that, well, actually, if you'd have accepted that and they'd have stuck to it, you'd have had the money before it came before the judge, or perhaps the judge may think that that was a reasonable offer. And again, what a judge will be looking for is to as well as actually being able to see that the money is owed, they will actually be looking to see that you have tried to avoid, to avoid having to go to the legal process, which, as I say, not only would that be expected there, but it is good practice and professional and important for the good reputation of your business. So ultimately, this is the only reason I mention this is because this isn't any sort of legal advice. It's just more looking at the end, what would be the ultimately ultimately what you would be presented with, and that may change your thinking throughout, because you may sort of think, well, actually, no, I'm not happy with that query that they've raised, and I'm not happy to discount the invoice. But you may think, actually, when I think of what my alternative is, I may actually feel that that is just easier. And you know, sort of to offer a sort of gesture of goodwill means that you're not accepting that that there's anything wrong. It's just, it's a gesture of goodwill. Ultimately, if a judge rules in your favour and the person still doesn't pay, then you have to enforce that debt. So you want to think of things such as, does the person have other debt that you're aware of? Because if they already have a whole load of county court judgments against them, then another one may not be sufficient to encourage them to pay. Do they have enough money to pay? If they don't pay, you know, are they employed? Is there a potential of having an attachment of earnings? If you went down the recovery route of bailiffs, would they have any goods that would cover the bill? Do they have any assets? So these are the things, because of course, if ultimately a judge ruled in your favour and they didn't pay, and then you couldn't recover the money, then you're not going to get those costs back that you've incurred. And so ultimately, you've not only wasted money, but you've wasted your time and your energy. So, as I say, the simple things at the start, if you get to a position where, you know, where it becomes evident that that person's not engaging and you've not been able to sort of to resolve that, then you do need to think about the end, you know, sort of the end result there. So that is always really important. But it will be, if you're you know, providing a professional service, and you're you know, providing good quality services or good quality goods, then it will be rare. Because mostly, if your customer hasn't paid you, it will be that they haven't received the invoice, that they've forgotten, that they've had you know, cash flow problems, things that you can amicably you know, in a way that won't damage the relationship if you intend to keep trading with them. So hopefully this gives you just some things to think of. As I say, it's certainly not in any way legal advice in terms of if you should, or in terms of you know, your case if you went to you know, sort of down the legal route. It's just the, you know, the things that you need to consider if you ended up going that route, and sometimes that can adjust your thinking in the sort of more informal in the more informal stages. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully you are getting paid in a timely manner. As I say, this is really to sort of like think about if it's an exception. If you find that a lot of your customers aren't paying, then you know, you really probably do need to look at why that, you know, why that is, and adjust things so that that's not happening anymore. And as I say, we talk about that aspect in a different video, so I shan't go back into that now. As I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. And if you found the information useful, then please do like the video too. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.